Welcome everyone to this week's IPLD sync meeting. It's the 29th of March 2021. And as every week, we go over the stuff that we've worked on the past week and then discuss any open agenda items. I start with myself, and the update is just as boring as, as every week the past few weeks. But I'm still working on the JS multi-formats integration into JS IPFS UnixFS and JS IPFS. I've linked the PRs or draft PRs in the meeting notes. Yeah, still ongoing. I still hope to get at least the UnixFS part done this quarter, which is not that many days left. We'll see. But what perhaps is interesting, there were also changes, or I proposed changes on JS multi-formats. It's interesting because, so for people that are not that deep into JavaScript, but or for people into JavaScript, it's interesting. So there's two ways to load modules. There is the node way, and there is the new ES6 modules loading way. And so for the JS multi-format stuff and the new IPLD stuff, Michael, and also I agreed with him, it makes sense to use the new module stuff because like this is what people will use in the future. But we of course need to be compatible with the old stuff because this is, for example, what JS IPFS is using. And then of course we had this effort in JS IPFS that added the TypeScript typing. So the problem is we got it working with the old module format, coding in the new one, kind of like compiling it to the old one. But now you also need to make sure that the TypeScript types work. But the problem is you can't, it's really difficult to get them working with the new stuff as well as with the old stuff. And so we had problems with those things. And what we now ended up with is that in the module system, you have something like, it's called default export, which means a single file exports a single thing and not multiple things. And normally you're happy to use this, but in our case, it turned out like it doesn't work well with the typing and everything. So the easiest solution that Gozala proposed was just don't use default exports, but just export it by name. So it's kind of like a technical detail. And like if you then import things, it's a bit different and might not be as nice, the imports, but I think it's totally workable. And I also found, so when I did the research from blog posts about like people said, well, you shouldn't use default exports at all. So there's also those kind of people. So it's kind of like, it's kind of okay to use so-called named exports. This is what we do now. And the good news now is that it's really smooth to use it with the new module system, with the old module system, as well as with the TypeScript types. And you don't get any strange error messages you don't understand. So this is about to be merged. We had a few discussions about the naming and so on, but hopefully this JS multi-formats PR will be merged today or tomorrow because I kind of need it for my work. And I think moving forward, we probably will use, or I suggest that we use for our JS modules always named exports because it's just smoother. So I'm not saying that it's not possible with default exports, but it's just we would need some way to make it work somehow, and it might then break somewhere else. And this was just the cleaner approach, I think, and it seems to work so far. And also, like to make it even more complicated, if you use some bundlers, they also mix up things. So it then depends on if you use Webpack or Parcel or some other one. And so, yeah, it's really complicated. And I think now we're at a stage where it's, I think, kind of works on all the things that we tried it on. And yeah, they're the typing passes as well as the tests. So that looks promising. Cool. Yes, that's all I have. So next on my list is Eric.
Hello. So I have not super many updates this week, but a couple of small ones that are nice. The legacy Go IPLD format repos have finally got a status text in them, a little section of the README that's saying, hi, by the way, there's newer alternatives. and pointing a link. So Will started a PR for that. I added a little more diff on top of it as well, that I have an idea that I want to try out. And so if anybody has like feelings on this and wants to comment later, please do. No, we didn't do it for other repos in response to question in the chat. We should. Because we've got a bunch of repos that probably need some sort of update to their status text. I'm trying the idea of maybe we should put some bold sort of keywords in these text areas, and otherwise go free text, because I think trying to make this overly structural will probably crash and burn by being too high overhead. But I'm going to try to like pick some bold words like has alternatives available and put that in like bold and markdown. And maybe some loose convention around that will be a useful thing to help us talk clearly about this in the future. In my wildest dreams, maybe we'll write a little script that goes through repos and checks who has these bold text tags available, and then we can build dashboards. Not going to do that this week, but it's an idea. Okay, so thank you, Will, for kickstarting that. There's an issue that's been opened on the Go IPLD Prime repo about the link context abstraction. If anybody is interested in that and has opinions about the friction of that, or has run across it, especially in performance profiling, it would be interesting to get more information on that. Otherwise, maybe we'll resume that thought later. And one thing I want to note from others that are not present in the call, but I know are doing awesome stuff, this Go Unix FS node repo that I keep mentioning in passing over the weeks, I believe it is going to be going a little bit further. The team that is working on upgrading a bunch of IPFS internals, Go IPFS internals, they've realized that their roadmap for upgrading Go IPFS internals requires them to have this Go Unix FS node library and be at least, I think, able to read the Unix FS v1 sharded directories. So that feature, I think, is intended to make it into ADL land soon. It's very exciting. Yeah, that's about it.
Thanks. Next is Danielle.
Cool. Where's my tab? So I'll be brief. I've still been doing work on DAGPB. So spec-wise, we're still looking good. I did mention on Slack briefly that there was one test that was failing, and it turns out that some people did write their own protobuf encoders and decoders for PB nodes, and they used a different order. So we ended up agreeing to still have a must for a canonical format, but then be more lenient on decoding so that we actually keep backwards compatibility with IPFS data. So the spec change is there. And I also updated the code, and that's sitting on my laptop because I've got another PR, and I don't want to enter into conflicts with myself. And we don't live in a world where I can push a chain of PRs, unfortunately. The other PR that's causing this chain is a bunch of performance improvements in Go codec DAGPB. It really roughly is just that the old protobuf, DAGPB encoder and decoder was code generated, and it worked directly on bytes, whereas the new one tries to do fancy stuff with reader and writer, which is fine, but it's also pretty slow. So I did something a little cheeky, which is use a package called protowire from the new protobuf library. And it's well optimized, and it has some primitives like encode variant and consume variant and stuff like that. So I was able to remove a bunch of code. It's faster, so now the overhead is practically nothing. It's still a little bit of overhead because IPLD Prime still has a little bit of overhead, and I will talk about that later. But it's practically non-existent now. It is an extra dependency on Go codec DAGPB, but I reckon that's fine because if anybody is importing Go codec DAGPB, I think importing the protobuf libraries is reasonable. And if anybody thinks that's not the case, please shout. And lastly, in terms of IPLD Prime, the performance is fine. I'm finding that the last 20% of performance that I can gain back is basically allocs. So you look at the CPU profile and it's just the top 20 is just runtime functions, and it's essentially just allocations that I can't get rid of. And it's kind of sad because they're really small allocations that maybe we could get rid of. One, for example, is each PB link in the schema has a maybe string for the name, and there's a bunch of other optional fields. And each one of these, as far as I can tell, when it gets assigned to, it allocates. And I'm thinking to myself, integers and strings, they're so small. Do we really need pointers? I don't know. It feels like we could just stick them in directly in the parent. And I see Eric.
There's actually a feature for this in the code gen already. It's just horribly documented that somewhere you put a magic string in a map and it'll do this. I'll have to refigure out what the magic string is later. Even I don't remember. I'm sorry.
Fair enough. So yeah, if I can turn that on, I think I'm going to be able to shave off an extra few percent. But yeah, otherwise, I wrote a benchmark for Go Merkle DAG that compares the old encode and decode round trip with the new one. And we used to be about 20% slower overall. And that was basically the new codec. And now we're basically within the noise threshold. So it's practically as good as it was before. And that's it for me.
Thanks. Does anyone...
And in particular, when put into Go IPFS, the integration tests using Dan's optimized version of DAG-PB are now faster than our baseline, arguably.
Cool. Does anyone else have any updates?
I have a very short update. I actually spammed some of you while we were talking with a few messages. I met briefly with Organize on Friday, and they had a bunch of various questions about things. They start with this kind of misconception what a car file actually is. And I tagged a few of you for like various questions on what do we do for the Bitcoin ADL, the Filecoin ADL, sort of, or the GraphQL, whether we do selectors as a simple like list of blocks, things like that. Yeah, if we can answer those like within the week, it would be nice.
All right. Anything else?
I'm so excited about those performance results that Dan and Will have got. If you guys can also snapshot some of your anything, actually, like pprof files, the whole thing if you want, or like just like the PNG exports of stuff, I would love to have some like just random snapshot artifacts of that floating around that I can look at. They don't have to be, like I know if I have to profile anything myself, I'm going to go in and have to do a bunch of work in order to get like an interactive life, but just having some snapshots that give a like ballpark impression would be really helpful.
I mean, getting the pprof out of Dan's smaller Go bench thing is pretty doable. And I think that's what Dan has been using as part of his investigation for the broader one that Hannah posted the pings of in the channel, in our channel that we'll be talking about more. Those are running in test ground as a larger integration test. I don't know the way that one magically invokes getting pprofs out of test ground. I hear there is capacity for it, but that's not an easy ask.
Yeah, even some like, just take a picture of the thing at low res and like we can find a place for it to live. I don't need particularly high res data. It would just be really nice to, for example, this other issue that somebody opened asking, oh, is link context a huge problem because it's doing struct copies, like yada, yada, yada. I'm like, I bet it's not, but I have no data and neither does the other person opening the issue. So like the tiniest bit of low res data would be just like handy.
But I should also say that it depends on what you're doing, because at least for our use case, we have to translate between proto-node and the DAG-PB node at every iteration. So it's not really representative of somebody doing the right thing.
Probably true also, but synthetic benchmarks can also be, I would appreciate having like the random real world data.
All right. I have one thing that there's a public holiday next Monday, so I won't be here. So I just wonder like who would run the meeting. I know that Rod has all the access to things to run the meeting and stream it and whatnot, but will you be there next week, or should I give it to like try to get the access to someone else as well, just for
Yeah, you probably should give it to someone else as well, just in case. It's just coming out of the Leeds meetings before this. Like, there's a quick jump.
So who wants to volunteer for?
Could also sorry.
Sorry, what? No, Eric was first.
I think Peter is not allowed to volunteer for any more responsibility on anything. That's just a rule. So
and also wait also like Peter, for Peter it's also a public holiday. Just to mention it. So he shouldn't be there. So Peter can't do it because he won't be there. It's a public holiday. So yeah, so I guess Eric, should I get you set up?
I think I will have technical difficulties. I know this in advance.
But can I at least I give you the access that you can be the host at least? Like someone has to be the host at least to do things.
Yeah, you don't have to broadcast. You can just record.
Okay.
And then,
I mean, we can talk about this more later. But in general, actually, I had been thinking about bringing up, do we want to do these every week, or would this meeting be useful enough if it was alternate weeks?
I think with Will's team sort of scaling down on their work, there's probably going to be less to talk about on an ongoing basis. I've got a bunch of work to do on JS IPLD this week. It's not very interesting, but I just don't think there's going to be a ton of news for a weekly meeting.
And I will be like end of the quarter is this week, so next week I will be full-time crypto computer lab, so I won't do any IPLD related stuff, probably like some side things perhaps, but not like really like what I currently do is I do half-time really like the JS model format stuff, so I won't do that. So I guess it would make sense to do them, get back to the old format that we had in the beginning. I think do it every 2 weeks. Yeah.
I think this time slot becomes more awkward for me as well next week. This goes to 7 a.m. but I have to be up for a weekly meeting at 6 a.m. before it. So I don't know what I'm going to do yet.
For the sake of the recording, let's decide this async. Is there anything else that you want to discuss that people would actually want to hear?
Yes, we can. Yeah. But do we then basically say we have definitely next week we have a meeting? So that basically people watching this now that whether there will be a meeting or not. Or should we just skip next week and then go from there? I think we should have at least a decision on like.
Let's skip next week. Voting for skip next week with skip.
I'll be away the week after though, but
that's a skip.
Okay, so we skip next week and then I will be back, so we don't have to deal anything with any things, and then we can like discuss it, how we do it, or if anyone has any comments can chat with us, email us. Yeah. And so also like, please, if you talk to any other people that might have joined in the past, just let them know perhaps that there's something going on, that we might not do it every week. Cool. Okay. I also put it in the meeting notes, I guess. Cool. All right. Is there anything else? No. Okay, then thanks everyone for attending, and see you all in 2 weeks.